Have you ever started something new, felt completely alive for 3 months, and then watched that feeling quietly disappear, right around the time everyone else says you should be getting serious? Have you ever looked at your bookshelf, your unfinished courses, your half-built side projects, and felt a wave of shame instead of a pride? Have you ever been asked, "So what do you actually do?" and felt your stomach drop because the honest answer takes longer than anyone wants to hear? Have you ever envied someone who's known exactly what they wanted to be since they were 12? Not because their path sounded more exciting, but because it sounded so much simpler than yours. Most people assume this means you can't commit, that you're scattered, unfocused, allergic to follow through. But the truth is, for a specific kind of mind, this isn't a discipline problem at all. It's a mismatch between how your brain is wired and the kind of career advice it's been handed since childhood. Today, we're going to break down the real psychology of people who have too many interests, why chasing one lifelong lane feels almost physically wrong to them, and how they can build an actual career strategy instead of apologizing for how their mind works. Welcome to Psychology Sounds. Tell us in the comment section how this resonates with you. Like the video and subscribe to support us. To understand this pattern, you have to understand that not every mind is built for the same kind of world. Psychologists sometimes describe learning environments as either kind or wicked. A kind environment has stable rules and fast, clear feedback, like a chessboard or a golf swing. Repetition works. Depth pays off predictably. A wicked environment is the opposite. The rules shift. Feedback arrives late if it arrives at all. And yesterday's expertise doesn't always apply to today's problem. For a century, career advice was built almost entirely around the kind environment: go deep, go narrow, become the expert, and the reward will follow. Think about the difference between a golfer and a firefighter. A golfer operates in a kind environment, the rules never change, the feedback is immediate, and thousands of hours of repetition reliably produce mastery. A firefighter works in a wicked one. Every fire is different, the variables shift in real time, and yesterday's playbook might get someone killed today. But some minds are wired differently from the start. They're built to move across domains, to notice when a pattern from one field quietly explains something in a completely different one. That's not a lack of discipline. It's a different kind of intelligence, one suited for exactly the unpredictable, wicked world most of us actually live and work in now. So what does that wiring actually look like day to day? Let's break down the signs. Sign 1. They feel guilty every time something new pulls them in. A new interest shows up. Pottery, coding, ancient history, and instead of curiosity, the first feeling is dread. Here we go again. They brace for the moment someone asks if they're actually going to stick with this one, as if enthusiasm itself needs a permission slip. The joy of discovery gets immediately taxed by anticipated judgment, so even the good part of starting something new comes preloaded with shame. Over time, some stop announcing new interests altogether, quietly picking things up and putting them down without telling anyone, just to avoid the conversation. There's also a quieter version of this same guilt that shows up in conversations. Someone asks what they're into lately, and instead of answering honestly, they trim the list down, mentioning only the one interest that sounds most respectable, hiding the other four like evidence. Sign 2, they've absorbed the jack of all trades, master of none line as a verdict on their worth. It gets repeated so often, by relatives, by career advice, by their own inner voice, that they stop questioning it. But here's what almost never gets said alongside it. Every time they tried to force themselves into narrow specialization, it felt like slowly suffocating, not settling in. They interpret that discomfort as evidence something is wrong with them, rather than evidence they're simply built for something else. Sign 3. They connect ideas across completely unrelated fields without even realizing it's unusual. They'll be reorganizing a closet and suddenly see the exact same branching logic they learned studying tree roots. They'll read about musical counterpoint and immediately picture a cleaner way to structure a spreadsheet. Psychologists sometimes call this far transfer, the ability to see the underlying structure of something and apply it somewhere totally different, as opposed to near transfer, which just applies a skill to a nearly identical problem. Most people assume this scattered pattern noticing is a distraction from real focus. In reality, it's a rare cognitive skill, one that most single-track specialists never develop. because they never had enough varied material to notice the patterns in the first place. A person who understands how a river carves a delta might suddenly see a better way to organize a filing system. A dancer who understands rhythm might spot the missing beat in a piece of writing that no editor caught. That is the actual mechanism at work, not distraction, but translation. Sign 4. They walk away from things right when they start to feel genuinely good at them. To everyone watching, this looks like quitting, like proof they can't finish anything. But often, what's actually happening is that the core curiosity has been satisfied. They've reached a real functional fluency, not world-class mastery, but the ability to solve most common problems in that area without panicking. And once that itch is scratched, their mind is already reaching for the next thread. They call it failure. It's closer to a natural stopping point that specialists rarely experience because specialists are trained to keep pushing long after the initial curiosity has been replaced by obligation. Here's where it gets painful. Because none of this looks like a normal career path from the outside, the comparison never stops. Everyone around them seems to have found their thing early and gone deep, while they're still explaining again why their resume looks like 3 different people wrote it. That comparison quietly curdles into something heavier, the fear of wasted potential. Not I haven't found my path, but I've wasted years I can't get back. They start treating their own curiosity as a liability to manage rather than a resource to use. And the shame compounds every single time they start something new, because starting has become tangled up with the memory of every previous thing they supposedly failed to finish. Some respond by forcing themselves into a narrow lane anyway, gritting their teeth through a job or a degree that never fit, mistaking misery for maturity, and wondering privately why commitment feels like slowly running out of air. It's worth naming clearly that specialists are not the problem here, and depth itself is not the enemy. The world genuinely needs people who spend 20 years on one narrow question. The issue isn't that the specialist path exists, it's that it's been treated as the only legitimate path, the single ruler everyone gets measured against, regardless of what kind of mind they actually have. So what can someone with this kind of mind actually do, beyond just feeling less ashamed of it? Principle 1. Choose a focus for a season, not for a lifetime. The paralysis around picking the one thing disappears the moment the stakes get lowered. This isn't choosing forever, it's choosing for the next 6 to 18 months, long enough to build real depth in one area, short enough that it doesn't feel like a life sentence. When that season ends and the curiosity naturally moves on, that's not quitting. That's a deliberate transition, a graduation into the next pillar, not a retreat from the last one. And the first pillar doesn't need to be the most exciting one. Often the smartest choice is whichever pillar can generate stability first, a skill that pays the bills reliably, precisely, so the rest of the exploration has room to breathe without financial panic underneath it. Principle 2. Build an external system so nothing has to be kept alive, purely through guilt. A mind that generates this many interests will always outpace its own memory. Trying to hold every fascination in your head at once is exhausting, and it's what makes letting go of any of them feel dangerous, like the idea will simply vanish if you stop thinking about it. A simple note system, even something as basic as one running document, lets an interest be captured and released without guilt. The connection often shows up years later anyway, when an old note about medieval architecture suddenly explains exactly what's wrong with a website you're designing today. Principle 3. Stop measuring yourself against the specialist's yardstick. The specialist's goal was always depth in one place. That was never the actual goal here, and holding your progress up against theirs will always read as failure, because you're being measured by a ruler built for a completely different shape of mind. The real goal was never to master one thing, it was to become the kind of person who can see how separate things connect, which is exactly the skill a specialist by design rarely develops. That's not a smaller version of success, and it's not a consolation prize. In a world that keeps changing faster than any single expertise can keep up with, the ability to translate between fields isn't a fallback. It's increasingly the actual advantage. So, to recap, having too many interests was never a discipline problem. It comes from a mind built for a wicked, unpredictable world instead of a narrow, stable one. It shows up as guilt around starting new things, as absorbing a label that never actually fit, as connecting ideas across fields without realizing that's a real skill, and as walking away right when something feels finished rather than failed. The strategy isn't forcing yourself into someone else's shape. It's picking a focus for a season, building a system to catch the rest, and measuring yourself by a completely different standard than the one you were handed. If you've ever been called scattered for being endlessly curious, hear this. You were never meant to master just one thing. You were meant to be the person who sees how everything connects, and that has never been a smaller kind of intelligence. It's simply a different one. If this resonated, let us know in the comments which sign felt closest to your own story. And if you know someone who's been quietly ashamed of their own curiosity, share this with them. It might be exactly the reframe they've been needing, the one piece of language that finally makes their own mind make sense to them. Psychology Sound says, thanks for watching. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you next time.